I'll just speak loud. I don't know if this is working. I hear the buzz too.
Yeah, let's just get rid of this for right now because
Okay.
they're not making any noise.
I'm a loud person anyway.
So what's the buzz, man?
All right. Well, we'll start it. Okay. We've got people coming.
Well, shoot, my family drove down from Pasadena to Fullerton and they're not even here. Kids, where are you?
Well, this is the comics, so you know it's probably just shipping late. So anyway, let me introduce myself. My name is Batton, Lash, and I have the distinct honor of moderating this thing. And I'll be candid with you guys. I've known Mike Roya's work for years, but I know very little about him. So I'm going to learn with you guys. So I'm going to just ask questions that I always wondered about this guy, and he'll share it with all of us. Anyway, this is Mike Roya, longtime comic book artist, writer, swordsman, inker. And,
Yeah,
all
I
around.
penciled, I wrote, inked, never colored.
Not yet. But let's start with the basics. So where were you born?
I was born and raised in Willamette Valley in Oregon, a little town called Lebanon. I remember when I was a sophomore, we were so excited because the newspaper headline said, Marines land in Lebanon, but we didn't see them anyway.
So did you have an early interest in art?
Yeah, I guess my mother was a frustrated novelist and painter, and she encouraged me. And I just drew all the time, anything under the sun. And I knew that if I wanted to have a career in comic strips, it was 20 years too late. And if I wanted to work in comic books, I either had to go to New York or to the nearest market, Los Angeles. And so in 1965, after the birth of my third child, who was standing back there with the sunglasses on, and that's his sister, and that's my newest grandson, and that the glasses and the blue plaid shirt is my first grandson.
See, they made it.
And in 1964, Dale Broadhurst in Idaho and I, through Edgar Rice Burroughs fandom, decided we were going to do The Wizard of Venus. We got Hobart Burroughs' permission. We did this comic book in black and white, stapled it together, took it to the convention, and because I was positive that Russ Manning would be there because he was a Burroughs fan. And he'd go to the Dum Dum. Of course, he didn't go to conventions.
And he was drawing Cousin at the time.
Yeah. Well, he was doing Magnus and other stuff.
Right.
But I loved his work and patterned my style after him. He wasn't there, but Camille Castasu, who was the editor of Urban, said, Mike, I'm going to go visit him before I go back home, back east. I'll tell him that you're interested in sending him some samples. So I sent samples, and 4 months later he wrote back and he said, if I ever needed an assistant, I think he would work out. So I packed up the family and moved to Southern California, knocked on his door, and bless his heart, he gave me work that he didn't need to. And so by day I was a credit manager for Sherwin-Williams Paint Store. In the evenings and weekends I worked with Russ Manning, and in all kind of, yeah.
How old were your children when you packed them all up in the car? Drove them from Oregon to California.
Didn't I say I packed up the family? I packed up the family and took them to California.
Yes.
But by the way, all embarrassing questions will be a little later. So hold on to them, because we're moving ahead on the embarrassing stuff. But I'm curious. The first time I ever saw your work, and I found it very fascinating, was on album covers, cruising.
Oh yeah, I did at least 24 cruising covers.
What was fascinating about this, and I think I saw them in the back of the Warren magazine, I can't remember exactly, but do we know what cruising is at the time? And this is the mid-'60s. They were oldie records.
They were the history of rock and roll radio, and each album had the #1 disc jockey of the year recreating a broadcast with vintage commercials and weather reports and traffic reports and all the hits of those days.
I got that record, yeah.
But what's fascinating about the album covers is that there must have been 5 of them or so, 5 or 6.
In the beginning, I think there were 6 of them.
But there's a continuity because it was the same couple.
It was the story of Peg and Eddie. I mean, they meet, they date. He
gets drafted.
No, he goes away to college. He gets involved in all kinds of social issues, and she marries a soldier.
Right, right.
And then they meet again in a War Widows protest at a movie theater while they're showing 2001.
Yeah.
And they rediscover each other. Then they get married, and I always liked some tension in the covers. One of my favorites is I drew my Mustang on the cover, and I've got Peg in her cute little tennis outfit saying, "But Eddie," no, he's turning around, he's saying, "Peg, I got to talk to Mr. Dollarhide about that trouble at the campus, you know." And she says, "Well, I got to have another tennis lesson with Mike."
Well, did you write the copy?
In the beginning, the first 6 or so were thumbnails by the art director, who used to call me at parties and introduce me as the man who inked his covers, because I pencil inked and researched them. If you can imagine going to a used car lot in East Los Angeles, and these big, good-looking African-American salesmen with double-breasted shoes, and they're going, "What do you want, kid?" And I said, "I want to take some Polaroids inside the car and get the dash details." And they went, "Okay." But trying to find magazine covers and newspaper headlines from all these years, because it started, I believe, in '54. And then the guy that owned the record company wanted to revive the line, and he said, "We don't need that other guy, so you write and draw them." So, and the early covers were printed in one of the record album cover books, where I am credited as Mike Neuer.
You can all Google, I mean, it's pretty esoteric, but that's the first time I ever saw your art. And you can probably Google them in images. And
Some of them I'm proud of,
they're
some of them I'd
terrific.
love to do them over.
Well, that's a mark of a true artist, because you look back at the stuff
Yeah.
and say, I could do it better. But let's get back to mid-'60s in the comics. So you have your proverbial day job in a paint shop.
Well, and Russ Manning introduced me to Mike Ahrens, because Ahrens tried to get Russ to do work on the Marvel superhero shows.
All right. And,
You know,
Ahrens
Captain
is-
America shows, his Mighty
Right.
Shield, you know, those shows. And Mike Ahrens hired me, so I was now working full-time in the animation business, if you call that animation, and still moonlighting with Russ Manning. And that resulted in, eventually, the Saturday morning, the very first Spider-Man Saturday morning show. And there was the hiatus between Marvel Superheroes and Spider-Man, and at that time, Gold Key Comics, Western Publishing, wanted more stuff from Russ Manning. And he told them that the only way he could do more work is if I were assisting him on everything, but there wouldn't be that amount of work to pay me a living. And so, as I told you the other night, my whole career has been luck. Western Publishing called me and said, "Would you like to come in and pick up some work?" And then a few months later, the animation studio called, and they said, "We're going back into production." I said, "I can only give you 20 hours a week." And in the wisdom of the animation company, they hired a guy from the construction trade to be the new manager. And he said, "Well, you know, if you're only working 20 hours a week at home, we can't give you screen credit." Naive 20-something kid. I didn't go to the union and tell them what he said, because they would have jumped all over him. Anyway, after 3 weeks, the director I worked directly with, Grant Simmons of Grant Ray Lawrence Animation, he said, "Mike, we have a problem." I said, "What?" He says, "Everyone at the studio is madder than hell at you." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because you're turning in 20 hours what they do in 40. I said, "Well, what do I do?" And he says, "Bill me for 40. And then there was the day he called me on a Friday, and he says, "Mike, if you want to come into the studio tomorrow, the sheriff is closing us down on money. You can take home anything you want."
So why was the
What
sheriff?
did I take home? 2 pages of Marvel original comic book art, left stacks of animation, and
Wow.
I had no interest in that.
Right. Well, why was the sheriff closing it down?
Well, Ray Patterson's wife, June, was in head of the writing department, and she had 5 writers. And for every Spider-Man show, someone, they would come up with whatever the synopsis was, the plot, and then she'd have all 5 writers write their version, and then she'd pick the one that they wanted to do. Well, they went bankrupt.
Yeah. And they paid each writer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, see, this is something I never knew, that you worked on the Marvel superhero shows and Spider-Man.
Well, and I'm also proud of the fact that Grant Simmons wanted me, with this voice, wanted me to be the voice of Peter Parker and Spider-Man. But he said, unfortunately, Lawrence wants to use that blasted non-union outfit in Canada again.
Funny. Did you work on the second season?
No.
Okay.
No, I was so busy then, and my first wife and my fantastic kids were AAU swimmers, and they would work out every night. And one night I'm crossing the backyard from my studio, and the phone is ringing in the kitchen, and I run and I pick it up. I go, hello? And this voice says, Mike Ryer, this is Jack Kirby. Alex Toth says you're a pretty good anchor. And the next day I was at Jack's house, and he told me what he wanted me to do, and I said, I'll bring it to you tomorrow. And he says, no, just sit here and do it at my board. And it's like, my God, I'd always wanted to ink Jack Kirby, and now he's every 20 minutes coming in and looking over my shoulder. But it's like getting to meet Roz, who was the, you know, they say behind every great man there's a great woman, and boy, that's true in their case.
Well, what year is this now?
This is actually 68 or 69.
So he had just moved out to California.
Yeah, he was in California. He was still at Marvel, but I inked a gob of stuff he was doing for Marvel Mania, and stuff like the Toys for Tot posters
Right.
with the Marines on them, and a lot of other stuff. And then I guess it was late 79. I'm sorry, 69. He called me. He says, Mike, he says, I'm going back to New York. I can't tell you what's going on, but you're part of it. So he came back. I got a call from the airport. He says, Mike, I just got back from New York. I've left Marvel and gone to D.C., but they won't let me bring you along. And so after 5 issues of all of his new books, he finally convinced them to let me ink them and letter them on the West Coast, because he wanted to prove to them that everything could be done on the West Coast. And DC acquiesced to his wishes because they were convinced I would fail,
Wow.
thereby proving that their need to monitor everything in-house was valid. Well, to their chagrin, I didn't fail. I'm the only inker who ever kept up with Jack's output. And, but it took 4 issues of everything before he could finally convince them. You know, because Mark Evanair and Steve Sherman every month are saying, look at all the stuff Coletta left out, Jack. And Jack's going, and of course Jack wanted everybody to have work, so he didn't want to like walk in and say, get rid of Coletta.
Sure.
So he went in and made sure that Coletta would get work when they finally said that I could ink the stuff. And it's funny, I was in New York a few months before that, and I went into Carmen Infantino's office and I says, Carmine, I can do a better job
Wow.
than Vinny's doing. And I had lunch with Dick Giordano, and he says, you know, Mike, you're getting a reputation of being cocky. I said, well, what I said was true.
Wow. Well, we're getting, see, it's so exciting here. We're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. I just want to get back a little bit that Kirby said to you, Toth said, you're a pretty good inker. How did you meet Alex Toth?
Oh, well, I think the first week that we were in California in April of 1965, I found Alex's phone number in the Pasadena telephone directory. And I called him up and I said, hey.
Out of the blue. Just out of the blue.
Yeah, I just called him up and said, hey, I know that you love Noel Sickles' Scorchy Smith, and I have a stack of dailies from the old newspapers. Would you like to have them? He says, yeah, come on up to the house. So I was there for 8 hours. And he invited me to dinner, to his wife's chagrin, you know. And we watched an episode of Johnny Quest that night before I left. And then a few weeks later, whatever the time period is, I'm now in the animation business. I'm at my first union meeting, and he walks by and he says, hey kiddo, what are you doing here? And I says, I'm in the biz, you know. And we had a similar interest in Errol Flynn, and he came down to the house a couple of times, and I was a 16mm film collector. And we would watch Flynn movies. And after each screening, he'd say, you know, I really don't like that person. Could you not invite them? So the last screening I had with him, there was just him and me. Now, Alex was an incredible guy. I never, ever got the opportunity to ink Alex. I would have liked to, because I think he was, in his own way, the same kind of genius that Kirby was.
Right.
His mantra was, less is more. And when Jack was delivering something at Marvel Mania, Mark Evanier, who worked there, Jack had said something, are there any inkers on the West Coast? And Mark said, well, I know Mike Royer. And that was it. And then Jack said to Alex, he said, what do you know about Mike Royer? And Alex apparently gave me a very good recommendation.
Wow.
And so Alex and I, and anyone that knew Alex, you were friends off and on with him. Because Alex, if you didn't call him once a week, he thought you didn't like him anymore. But
so when you, I have to ask this. When you were watching Johnny Quest with him, did he annotate it? Was he?
oh yeah, he would talk about the things, and he wasn't exactly I think a fan of Doug Wiley, but he would make comments about that just didn't work. I don't know why we did that, and we did this, and they didn't let us finish it that way, and it was really a fun evening. My whole career was just one lucky happenstance after another.
Well, I noticed you did, after the cruising stuff, your first comics work I saw was for the Warren books.
Yeah, I did a bunch of stuff for Jim Warren. Some of it I look at it and I go, well, that's okay. And then some of it I look at it and go, oh, yeah.
And you were the second artist to draw Vampirella.
Well, actually, I drew the first Vampirella story before it actually became a series of stories, and she was on the planet, whatever it was called.
World, right.
Yeah.
Draculon.
And the first story is Jim Warren and Forey Ackerman are at the Warren publishing offices, and Vampirella comes up to see them. She flies up the elevator shaft. And some of it's good, some of it's bad, but my likenesses of Forey are very good.
Right. Well, that's appropriate for this show. You see, I never knew that. That was intended to be in the first issue,
Yeah.
right? Interesting.
And what they sent me were some Frank Frazetta costume designs and a couple of head turns,
And who modeled Vampirella?
I don't know.
Trina Robbins, who's at this show.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I never knew that.
Oh, wow. It's a
I do know that Bambi was Forey's idea,
Yeah.
because Forey, they didn't bring it up at the Remembering Forey panel this morning, but Forey liked attracting women. And at the 1969 St. Louis World Science Fiction Convention, some girl arrived before the heyday of cosplayers, and all she had on was sprinkles of gold fleck. And he instantly labeled her Miss Wonderlust.
All right, so you're working for Jack Kirby in the early 70s. And that was a long run. And, you know, all due respect to Joe Sinnott, Kirby's instincts was right. You were one of his best thinkers. You seem to know exactly what he intended.
I was lucky. I seemed to have some sort of empathy with what Jack was saying, because if I didn't mention it, I will now. I used to see the rare time you'd see a page of his pencils in a fanzine.
Right.
And I'd look at them and go, why isn't anybody inking Jack? And Jack was very political when people say, who's your favorite inker? But after he left comic books, and particularly I'm proud of the fact that at his wake, somebody asked Roz, who was Jack's favorite inker? And she said, Mike Royer.
Right.
Because whenever I inked anybody, whether it was Sparky Moore, Mike Aarons, Russ Manning, Jack Kirby, Hy Mencken, anybody, I wanted to, having no personality as an artist yet, I wanted to make it look like what I felt, or how they would have inked it. So that if you saw it, you would have thought they inked it. Because when I assisted Russ, even now I look at the first year stuff I did, I bound it in a book, gave it to Mother. It's called First Year's Apprenticeship. I can't tell you what I did.
Right.
And I felt that's what an assistant should do. And Russ liked my work well enough that in the last 4 months of the Sunday strip, when I went back working with him, he signed the pages Manning and Royer.
Yeah, that's nice.
And the very last Sunday page, he just gave me a rough tissue layout, and I penciled and inked and lettered the last Sunday page.
Well, that's the other thing I wanted to ask. I was, as a fan, impressed that this new guy, Mike Royer, was not only inking Kirby, you were lettering.
Oh, yeah. I had to letter a whole book in less than 2 days, and there was usually 3 chapter pages that took big display lettering.
Right.
And that was for the whopping amount of money when I started doing them in '70, of $15
Yeah.
a page and $2.50 a letter. I had to take less money than Coletta to get the
So
DA2.
did lettering become natural to you, or was it something that you just?
Well,
had to-
Mike Aarons at the animation studio was probably the most important mentor I ever had as a youngster. And I inked a lot of his cartoons, things for Peterson, and did the double tone
Right.
developing. And he asked me if I'd want to letter. And I says, I can't letter. He says, what do you mean you can't letter? You can draw, you can ink. You never want to be able to turn down an assignment because you can't do the whole thing. He says, it's drawing, Mike.
Nice.
Each letter is a drawing. And once I realized that, I could letter.
Right.